Thank you so much for your patience and welcome again. For those of you who weren't with us last week, thank you for joining us for the second session of this Monument Lab workshop presented by the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, which is the regional planning agency for Greater Boston, and the New England Foundation for the Arts, and co-sponsored by the Design Studio for Social Intervention, which is based here in Boston. And for those of you who were with us last week, welcome back. We're happy to have you here again. My name is Emma Bost, and I am the Arts and Culture Fellow at MAPC. Today's session is part of our latest collaboration with New England Foundation for the Arts, Public Art, Public Memory, which is a discussion series that explores how to use public art and collective memory to achieve more just and inclusive public spaces in Greater Boston and beyond. Part of that work requires understanding where we are to begin with. And for those of us who are in the area known as Greater Boston, this land where we live and work encompasses the traditional and unceded lands of the Massachusetts, Nipmuc, and Wampanoag people. We'd like to recognize their continued survival and contributions to our society, and to honor those whose hard work and lives were lost in the struggles for liberation and decolonization, which continue today. We recognize that there is a long history of colonization, displacement, and forced removal from this land. And we hope that today's discussion can be a step towards reorienting our collective future in ways that both recognize and repair those injustices. So without further ado, I'm very pleased to introduce Paul Farber and Sue Mobley of Monument Lab, who will be facilitating today's session. Paul and Sue, please feel free to take it away.
Well, hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Great to see everybody here who is back and some new faces. It's really a treat to be here with you.
Thank you all for having us back. Thank you to everyone who has taken part in both sessions. We are Sue Mobley, Senior Research Scholar at Monument Lab, and Paul Farber, Founding Director and Artistic Director at Monument Lab. We are speaking to you from separate places and would like to honor the fact that many of us are joining this call from different places. I am speaking to you from New Orleans, which is also Bulbanja, the native lands of the Chapatulas and Chitimacha people, and the native waters as well, because we are as much water as we are land. This is a place that was built by enslaved Africans, largely from Senegambia, and populated by the criminalized and deported poor of France, Le Fossa. I'm going to let Paul do his land acknowledgement, and then we're going to talk through some ground rules for the day.
Yeah, so I'm here in Philadelphia, where Monument Lab is rooted, though we have folks all around the country and a little bit beyond. And here in Philadelphia, we are reaching you from the ancestral lands of the Lenni Lenape people, who were agreed to, or said to agree to, a treaty with the English Quaker settlers that was supposed to last as long as the creeks and rivers flow and the sun, moon, and stars shine. Within a generation or so from that treaty, the sons of the city's founder and his colleagues perpetuated a massive land theft known as the Walking Purchase Path that dramatically impacted and, of course, dispossessed the Lenni Lenape of massive parts of their land. And Philadelphia, like Boston, often credited as a place of freedom and democracy, of course, within steps of our Independence Hall, enslaved African Americans worked coercively. And so we recognize today, as we're talking about how the past impacts the present, that we're reaching you from stolen lands built by stolen hands.
So today, We are going to have sometimes when we are working together and sometimes when we are listening closely and answering and asking questions in the chat. We are going to ask that everyone please mute and stay muted, that questions happen in the chat throughout, that you be fully in the virtual room, phones away to the extent possible, be present to what each other are taking away and contributing to conversations in breakouts. Remember to step up and step back in breakouts. And please assume good faith. Respect different perspectives and understandings. We're going to ask the people to try to take off and keep off their professional official hats in today's sessions, all the hats. And at the same time that you hold that your professional experiences are also part of who you are. So bring your whole self into the room. And please give each other and yourself grace. We are all laboring under strange conditions. There are interruptions. My 95-year-old neighbor is mowing his lawn midday. There will be kids, there will be pets, and there will be struggles that people are having that you can't see. Hold space for that, for each other, for yourself. Let's talk through some goals for the day.
Yeah. So I want to talk about some goals, but I also want to just kind of also make sure we introduce a few circles of who is here with us. I will say, having been on a lot of calls with Sue, that we can count on your neighbor to mow his lawn. Like
Amazing.
So he is an unofficial member of so many of our Zoom rooms, but thank you, neighbor. So Sue and I are representing Monument Lab. We're a public art and history studio, as I said, based in Philadelphia, but connected over many places. Sue and I have been thinking together and collaborating for many years as friends, as colleagues, and more recently, Sue, I'm really thrilled to keep saying, is now an official member of the Monument Lab team. And we couldn't be more thrilled, and will be co-directing our national monument audit and our field office initiative. So it's really great to be here. Sue and I prefer when we're in person for non-COVID times to not just be able to be in high-fiveable distance from one another, but to like feel different energies and the room out. Last week, thank you for everyone's grace for helping us adjust our facilitation style to being in the Zoom room. So just recognizing that. Also want to recognize that we have other members of the Monument Lab team here who are going to be, you might be seeing in some of your breakout rooms, who are working also behind the scenes. That includes Yannick, Wave, yep, Steph, Aaliyah. And of course, we're joined by two Monument Lab fellows and dear collaborators, Joel Garcia from LA and Ariel Julia Brown down the street from me in Philly. And just to give a sense for all of you, just from the intake forms that you shared, about 3/4 of you are in the New England area, and about 1/4 of you are claiming somewhere else. So it's just, that was not something that we expected from the beginning, but it's been really fantastic for us to see and get other perspectives, and just part of the kind of virtual nature that we're in. Our goal today is to be able to kind of do at least two things and have them braid together. One of them is to take a step back and appreciate some of the really important on-the-ground work happening from two of our Monument Lab fellows, who we'll talk about more in a moment. And the other one is to enter into kind of more intimate, as much as intimate as we can get on Zoom, breakout rooms to talk about different scenarios. Ultimately, deep down, we're not looking for a single fix today. We don't want you to walk in here or mosey in here and say like, all right, I'm gonna figure out how to fix everything. These are a set of approaches or questions and even collaborative steps to take, and hopefully to also leave and be plugged into things that not only Monument Lab is up to, but of course our friends and partners, MAPC, and the New England Foundation of the Arts.
So over the course of today's session, we are going to hear from Joel and Ariel and have a Q&A after each of their presentations. If you have questions for the Q&A, please put them in the chat while they're presenting. Presenters, please pull the chat down to the corner of your computer so it's not crazy distracting. Because we're going to be running rapid fire today. And we don't want lulls while questions are being considered. Be brave, ask questions. We will then go into breakout rooms to address a variety of scenarios that I had a lot of fun writing, which you, I hope, will have a lot of fun group problem solving. There are no right answers. There are maybe wrong answers, who knows? And we'll come back and discuss those together as well. You're going to have a slideshow. We'll explain more later, but it's going to be amazing. And with that, I would love for Paul to introduce today's speakers and get us rolling.
Yeah, so to get us rolling, we are going to do something we tried out last week. So if you're with us again, great. If not, here's the first one. It's a fill in the blank. We're not doing an icebreaker. We're not doing a group stretch, though you're always welcome to take a bio break to do so if you've been sitting in front of the computer. We're going to ask you a question that has not any one right answer. It's actually really it's personalized, not personal per se. We want you to think about it for about 10 or 15 seconds. You can type it in the chat, and then we're going to do a waterfall. So you're going to wait to press return, and then we're going to just see all of this waterfall kind of flow in. And the question is, I'm here because blank. And so just think about 10 or 15 seconds, what comes to your mind. You want to put it in the chat window. Don't press send yet. We want you to, again, kind of fidget with your professional hat, maybe toss it to the other side of the room. I am here because, okay? And in about 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.5, 1, send. Okay. Great. This gives us a composite really quickly where we can always go back and take a look. We invite you to kind of scroll up. Always these great connections are made here. Conversation. The word collective pops up a lot. Sue, what are you seeing?
Ariel, Julia Brown, super fan.
Join the club.
I want to hear what other people are thinking. I think that's my answer as well.
Great. Okay, so we have this collective imprint. We'll save it for the notes. But without further ado, I want to pass off to hear from Monument Lab fellow Joel Garcia, based in LA. Can you hear me now? So great. So I do not want to be muted when introducing the next speaker. It's really important to give a lot of love and appreciation for the work of Joel Garcia. Joel is a Monument Lab fellow based in Los Angeles. And we've had the great pleasure of getting to know Joel and his work over the last several years. And I'm going to now pass it off to Joel for a brief presentation.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Honored to share space with you. As Paul mentioned, I'm joining you all from Los Angeles, more specifically East Los Angeles, community outside of the downtown area, on territory that was originally known as Apachanga, the ancestral homelands of the Tongva, who are still very much present here today in Los Angeles. I want to share, I guess, I want to come from the perspective of operationalizing this idea of land acknowledgements. You know, we're doing this work of reconciling with our past, dealing with these monuments, with the physical space that our cities have built, which many times exclude Native people as an Indigenous person living here, I have to reckon with the fact that this is now my ancestral homeland, and my presence here continues to displace my Tongva relatives. Living here continues to be an obstacle to them being able to reclaim their homeland. They're not federally recognized, and so they're in this weird in-between space where they can't, they can access resources that somebody like me who can pass for a Latino can, totally access. So I say that to ground where my work is coming from and how I have approached this work with dealing with monuments. And so I'm gonna share my screen and then walk you through, just kind of, I would have to say, I've been encouraged to call these somewhat of like best practices in working, not just with community. I'm very much about creating processes that completely incorporate community, that uplift non-institutional expertise, and just in the way that Sue encouraged us to take off our hats for the day, our institutional titles. As community members, I'm very much about folks carrying their lived experience to really help us, folks who live on these ancestral lands, to learn and be able to connect with folks in a very authentic and just way. So again, my name is Joel Garcia, here from Yagna, Los Angeles, and what I'm gonna kind of cover is a process with which we were able to remove the Sarah statue at Olvera Street. And a little bit of background information: the Sarah statue was installed about 100 years ago, and in between then and now, there were many attempts to remove the statue. 99% of those attempts had been through the legal process that a city or a county would set forth. And so one of the things that I've done I was born and raised here, has been to connect with elders, kind of not necessarily ask permission, but ask and talk about intention. And through that, I have learned that there was many attempts to remove the statue, all of which got stuck in bureaucracy. The city of LA is very dense with bureaucracy, and it's created that way. It's intended for it not to be community accessible. And so some of the things that I've learned to move forward with dealing with issues that I'm not the person most impacted. Yes, I'm an Indigenous person, but this is not my homeland. Those most impacted by these issues are gonna be the Indigenous community of a given territory, in this case, Los Angeles. So some questions, right? How was this decided? Like, who decided to remove the statue? Like I mentioned, are those most impacted included in this process? Not at the tail end of it, but at the start of it. Who is in opposition of the removal of any monument, any statue? And who's participating? Many times, as speaking just from my own experience, activists want to be the ones at the lead of this, want to be the ones to actually pull it down, because they want that selfie of them, like with the rope and everything, which I don't encourage, because then who knows what happens legally. And then what is actually happening, right? Like what is it that is happening at that given moment? When we decided to topple the Sarah statue took up 2 minutes of an hour and a half of us being together. 2 minutes. The toppling itself took about 15 seconds. What happened at the front end and tail end of this action? That's where the bulk of the work is gonna be. And then who's controlling the narrative? Who gets to tell this story, right? From the start to all the articles that get written. And then what are the next steps? For us, this was the beginning of something. It wasn't a final culminating moment in us dealing with colonial monuments. So building community for me is very important. Ensuring that every elder that we could access from the various tribal nations of Los Angeles had influence over process, influence over what was communicated to the world and what happened at the front end until end of this action. So we invited, a bunch of people to come, folks who are also part of the city process, like folks working within the city, but also just community members. Some folks received a text that said, we invite you to a ceremony, time and place, that was it. And they trusted that, because of the work that we do, that they were showing up to something that was gonna be beautiful. For many, this is the first time that they were coming out, given the stay-at-home orders. So it was really important for them to be there personally. And like I said, some of them just received that text, we invite you to a ceremony, and out they came. So again, how were elders included? Given that we're in the time of COVID, keeping our elders safe is of the utmost priority. So engagement with them, whether through text, whether through phone calls, we included them. We also brought in youth because they got to reckon with this once we're out of the picture. So they have to have a say in the process. And most importantly, how are we bringing folks from diverse backgrounds together? Because it's one thing for us as folks who consider ourselves to be part of this social justice field, world, whatever, that we include folks who are on the fence that might not understand why these things are happening. So bringing them in as part of the process as well. Super important. Research. I think one of the things that we learned from the Columbus removal was the power of non-existent processes within the city. So the city didn't have a process to remove a monument that had contentious history. We also learned from the removal of the Columbus statue that artistically, the object was worth $0. It was a copy of a copy, and it just worth its weight in scrap metal. So we also knew that if we remove this similar object, we wouldn't face any charges. Maybe a ticket here and there, but not any real legal standing to be prosecuted. So we banked on all of that. We have relationships within the city. We informed them that this was gonna happen, but we let them know just with enough time so that they couldn't react, but instead were forced to support what we were doing because we framed this as a ceremony, not a toppling. And so days later, the council members who oversee all of this called this an act of civil disobedience. And for us, that was great because at that moment, we're changing policy. And that means that from now on, we don't have to recreate this whole spectacle again. There's policy and we can use policy to hold the city accountable. So research is super important. Who owns the object? Who owns the land that the object is on? Sometimes who owns a pedestal? Like with the Sarah statue, 3 different entities own different parts of that monument. Oh. Go back. I'm a big person about open sourcing information, putting out the information that's gonna help people feel empowered to take things into their hands if they have to. So this DIY statue removal guide for the Columbus statue was really important in putting pressure on county officials to get going with this process. Interestingly enough, the one process that we thought would be the least likely was the one with which they removed the statue. Option A, somebody walked up with a flathead screwdriver and no power tools, unscrewed the bolt on both sides, and that was it. Simple. And it's like, sometimes we think like these things are so permanent and it's gonna take so much to remove them. Sometimes it's that simple. Simple flathead screwdriver. Creating the opportunities for everybody to engage. From the little ones, you see little babies back there, to the oldest folks that can participate. We made space for everybody to join in whichever way they felt comfortable. This was a bunch of families that came together, and I'll show you a video towards the end, and every single person was able to participate. Every person was able to select how they wanted to engage, and we created that space, we designed that space for this to happen, and it was beautiful. So some pointers, develop tasks for people to take ownership of, like what needs to happen that people can totally just go with it. We wanted an altar to be created as soon as the monument was toppled, And as you can see in the photo, folks came and did their thing. You know, they brought their own cultural practices. So the woman at the top of the pedestal is, you know, somebody related to the Oshun traditions, Yoruba traditions, and they created an altar. Beautiful, right? Like this way of like all these different cultural beliefs coming together. Guide the process, don't impose. As folks creating processes to like deal with these monuments, whether you're an activist, urban planner, or somebody within the city, just create a roadmap. And like today, set an intention. This is what we hope to achieve. And then we'll, you know, kind of just help guide that process. And then once you have a core team of folks really invested in this, like collectively decide who's doing what, who's documenting, who's speaking to the press, who's speaking to the elected officials, to the police. We had no police presence during this. You know, to design something where the police feel also like they don't want to engage because it's a bunch of families. It was framed as a ceremony. They kept their distance. Great. Controlling the narrative. Prior to the toppling, we put out a series of statements, all co-created with tribal elders, with community members. And we also invited the press, specific press members who we had, you know, we had relationships with, but also had trust that what they would write would reflect what happened that day. And we had a series of articles come out through the LA Times and just national media, et cetera. And helping them see what the day was gonna be like also informed the type of photography that their folks took, right? Here's this young person embracing the cross that broke off of the monument. So things that we, you know, the framing that we wanted got out there, and that was great. And then this is where I feel like it's really, really important to design and just make space for you to participate. So LA Talk was a local media outlet. We didn't think that they would take to this in the way that they did. They were really impacted by it personally, like everybody who came out from their team. So one, they wrote the article, and the video that I'll show later, we didn't know what was gonna happen, but they put it together so beautifully, and it just underscores why these processes are important of being able to, you know, just create space for everybody to engage. And then there's the after effect, reclaiming space, toppled the monument, but how do we change the use of that space? How do we change the aesthetics of that space? You know, we toppled that Sarah statue on the summer solstice, a very important day for tribal folks here in California. But it was also leading up to Father's Day. We were not gonna go another day without that father standing there. So intentionality. And we went back at the fall equinox and we did these prayer flags. We invited a bunch of community members to set some prayers down by tying these ribbons all over the grounds. And while we were doing this, there's a bunch of unsheltered folks that live in the park also came and participated. Again, making space for folks to engage, whether they understand what's happening or not. And making, you know, setting those intentions of being able to build understanding with folks who might disagree. The security guard you saw earlier, that team of folks, when we toppled the statue, didn't know what was happening. And they panicked, but it was now these same folks who gave us access to the space, right? You see this little fence around where the Sarah statue was. We could easily hop over it and do our thing. But now they're participating in creating access. The city's participating in creating access. They might not understand everything, but there's a conversation going on to build that understanding. And that's super important, you know? So for us, how do we use that space? How do we reclaim that space ceremonially through aesthetics? Simple, just changing the look and vibe of that place can do a lot. And it's done a lot. Sorry, I guess neighbors getting picked up. And so I really want to like have folks think about that, you know, like the after effects of removing something and changing the use of it. Who gets to decide what the use of that space becomes? I think for folks who are part of the city and part of teams trying to figure out what this looks like, we're not going to achieve it through any city process. We're going to achieve it through the vision of community members who have been having to deal with these monuments and having to walk by them and reckon with that imposition over and over and over. And if I can, I'm gonna try and share this video. I know there's always all these little technical issues with sound, and I hope I'm good with time.
If you have any problems with the video, we can also, if there's a link to it, we can put it in the chat as well.
Got it. Yannick has a link, so I'm hoping it'll work out. And now can I get my screen back?
Okay.
Okay, here we go. Let me see.
So, and just as we move forward, is it okay if Yannick takes the link and shares it in the chat?
Yes.
Okay. I know that some people have videos on, some people don't, but just if you do, just give hands up for Joel, wherever you are, to send that energy.
Yeah, because yeah, let's make sure that the sound works. And here we go.
Me'iha Nahinkam, hello relatives. My heart is with you today. We have reached a time and space where the oppressed are taking a firm stance and saying enough is enough. A time when we have to dismantle the system that doesn't work and has never worked for our people of color.
Grab the rope, everybody. Get a rope. Everybody, grab a rope. Separate rope. Spread out. Grab it. One, two, three.
This doesn't feel like a celebration. This is just the beginning of healing that needs to occur amongst our people. This is a man who has created genetic trauma for myself amongst our ancestors. These ancestors of ours, they struggled loving themselves because somebody like this told them that they were disgusting, told them that they were useless other than for sex and for slavery. And because of somebody like that, we struggle today as a community. These statues and monuments, which have been erected all over our sacred unceded lands, are constant reminders of the dominant society, their need to celebrate the wrongs of the past. We cannot teach love and compassion to our youth when they receive a completely different narrative in schools and outside of tribal communities. It is time to teach the truth and remove the lies and oppression. It is time to remove the commemorations of hate, bigotry, and colonization.
Great. Thank you so much, Joel. Thank you for that. And we have the link for
I believe the company should focus on what they do best.
I think
At
that's
Jacobus, that's
where am I? So just a quick update in regards to that toppling. Because of that toppling, now there's discussions of being able to return that land where the statue was, the park adjacent to it, and some other territory back to the Tonga community to be able to create some sort of learning center. So we removed that monument to spark some healing, and it's led to so many other conversations around public space, land use, and access for community in these processes.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you. We're gonna also have time for Q&A. Thank you for that. I wanna pass over to Ariel Julia Brown, who's also a Monument Lab fellow. Ariel is the founder of Black Spatial Relics, approaches commemoration in different ways and nonetheless powerful, and is also a curator on a Monument Lab project, Staying Power, coming next spring. So turning it over to Ariel.
Hey, y'all. Joel, I just thank you so much for your work. Yeah, I'm so moved in this moment. Yeah, I am not a singer. Paul knows. Sometimes I like to offer a song. Every day I get, I like to offer a song. And a song came to me that I'd like to share. It goes, there are those who want to set fire to the world. We are in danger. There is only time to work slowly. There is no time not to love. That song is a song I learned in community through alternate roots. If there are any roots people on the call, woot woot, I love roots. By Dina Metzger. And the lyrics really strike me. It talks about, it talks about being in response to people who intend to harm you, to systems that intend to harm you, and the imperativeness of working slowly. And I want to lift that and center that. Again, my name is Ariel Julia Brown. I'm an artist. I'm a dramaturg. I'm a performance curator. I am a Black Southern queer woman. I'm a West Coast Black woman. I'm a person who comes from a lineage of migration between the West Coast and Georgia, the state of Georgia, 4 generations deep of migration across that space, across those 2 spaces. I come from shit talk and singing and side eyes and lip and sassiness and so many powerful performances of refusal, of speaking to power, of affirmation as well. And I'm going to speak a bit today about Black spatial relics. I have other projects, and you can learn about those other projects at my website, arieljuliabrown.com, that are also in conversation with memory. But today I'll speak about Black spatial relics. And I think that what I really want to center in the work of Black spatial relics is our amplification of Black performance tradition. Sometimes I think when we think about performance, we talk about ephemerality, especially when we're talking about monuments, like time-based arts that are not permanent, that are not fixed, and therefore that do a different political thing. But I believe that in the work of thinking about how we're working slowly, how my Black performance really began many generations before and will extend and end many generations, I pray, after. Thank you, Jewel, for lifting in deeply intergenerational work with folks on both sides of the veil who are living with us in many different ways. So I just want to ground that is the ethos. That is the ethos of this work. I'm going to share my screen. So let me present this. If it wants to do that. So Black Spatial Relics is a performance residency. It's a new performance residency. It is not new. It supports new performance about slavery, justice, and freedom. And it's really an effort that was started in 2016. I incubated it while I was in graduate school at Brown University at the Center for the Study of Slavery and Justice. And it's really a space that supports and edifies and amplifies Black artists who are making performance, that is intent on getting folks free. I make that performance myself and found that there weren't gathering spaces, convening spaces for Black folks who are making performance in public at the protest or in, adjacent to a proscenium theater, but not quite, in a historic house or in another site that is in legacy with freedom and histories of subjugation of Black folks. And I wanted to find space, make resource, gather what I could to be able to support other artists, and found that there are hundreds of us that we out here, more or less. I want to share. Yeah. Oops. 1 too fast. I think it'll go back. Okay. Here are just a few images of the 18 different Black performance works that we've supported, that we've re-granted to over the last 4 years. They range from performances that are explicitly about linking the histories of slavery to contemporary injustices, to thinking about, to thinking about freedom transnationally. We also host convenings where we think about spaces to really conjure and develop mutual aid strategies for each other. So yeah, what we do, we offer paid residencies to Black artists who are making public performance about slavery, justice, and freedom, with a specific focus on projects that are in early stages of development or otherwise yet to be resourced. We offer dramaturgical, which is more or less research and historical support. And we offer presenting opportunities to artists as well. We offer convening spaces. Last year, we had a convening here in Philadelphia to be able to think about building networks of mutual aid and other networks of support. And more recently this year, we offered 2 rounds of micro grant opportunities for folks to be able to think about, community care efforts as we are distant, and collective research efforts as we are distant. And so what does all of this maybe have to do with monuments? Maybe that's not yet clear. I'm just saying that I do this work, we do this work because Black public performance makers have been in a critical political and restorative practice for centuries. We are essential instigators and thinkers in the work of memory keeping and memorialization. And we believe that these works need to be supported. So we built a space that expressly centers those practices. And you can learn more about that project at our website. Okay. So this last piece, I just really wanted to offer a few tactics, a few technologies really that would ground us in, some ways to think about Black radical performance and radical memory keeping by way of Black radical performance traditions. These are a few. And I wanted to, alongside highlighting these few, highlight a few artists that you might check out if you're not already tracking, because their work is really important. Excuse me. I want to lift the tradition and technology of repetition, or worrying the line. Repetition, we all know what it is. It shows up so often in Black performance. It shows up so often in Black music. It's so core and central to blues and jazz and gospel and really in R&B and so many Black musical traditions, sacred and secular. And repetition, a former teacher of mine, Eric N., lifts repetition as accumulation, as not unlike this waterfall that just happened, as a downpour that adds to a collective body. So when we see repetition in Black public performance, it's doing a thing to point at power, to point at remembering something, at needing to recall a thing, to point at gathering a number of things. That repetition, especially in Black protest performance, is essential it's an essential tactic in technology. And worrying the line is really about troubling a line that's repeated. So repeating it a new way so that we learn something new from it. And I want to amplify the work of Jody Linke Chow, who right now is working on a project called Junkanoo, which is based on the performance tradition Junkanoo, which is a 3-century-long tradition between West Africa and the Caribbean and the Eastern and the States that is about, Black radical performance. And each repetition of that is a worrying of the line of what it used to be. I want to quickly offer roll call. Roll call is a technology that Tony K. Bombara lifts. Muti Reed uses it often, but it is really about a citing and a naming of places and spaces and people. And a naming that is perhaps naming places, spaces, people, and lineages that don't get named. And the work of doing that in public and in public performance is essential, right? We hear that in our practices of ancestor veneration and at the protest, and we hear it in Black radical performance often. And I want to amplify the work of Muti Reed. Muti works a lot beautifully with roll call. And then finally, I want to just lift vigilance. Vigilance is something I think a lot about. It's about looking. Black vigilance, I think about as looking, tracking, watching, side-eyeing. And I think that there are a number of Black performance traditions that are in conversation with vigilance. I think that Memorial Day is in conversation historically with vigilance and Black vigilance and remembering the Black dead. I think that vigilance is in our everyday traditions, our barbecues, our watch night services, our church gatherings, our, there's so many Black everyday traditions that involve and engage looking. And we know that at protests, that at public space gatherings, there are moments when we see powerful documentation of Black folks facing off, staring in the eyes of police officers and other folks who mean to do them harm, and looking back and tracking. And that is a performance. That itself is a performance. And I want to amplify the work of Ebony Noel Golden, who so deeply thinks about and engages vigilance as a freedom practice. So that's what I have for y'all today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ariel. Whether with your hands or your emojis, give a lot of love for so much packed in there. And thank you both to Ariel and Joel. There's so much there. You've given really powerful takes. It's like a huge treat to have both of you in this room with us. In the interest of time, I just want to ask one question from the audience, and then we're going to move on. But clearly, whether it's in the chat or other ways, people can connect with you. And before I ask that question, I also want to just make sure, like, if you have questions or want to watch out for their work, follow Joel and Ariel on social media, because the work that they do, what they've talked about and not in here, is so powerful. So to just follow the work that they're doing. And we'll put links in the chat as well. Napoleon Jones Henderson asks a question about the need to occupy space by, the question of occupying space by removing a current monument. They ask, might not the space have been desecrated and really would be negative space to mount our sacred monument / memorial? In a quick way, before we move on, because we don't have a ton of time now, but just love to hear from both of you about that question of desecrated space and the how to bring to it sacred energy or reaction, and your take on that question. Joel, do you want to start? And again, we'll do this briefly, but hopefully hear from both of you before we move forward.
Yes, as you saw in that video, before the toppling, we had a gathering. We, did a small ceremony. And when we put out our statement, we called it, unmonumenting and cleansing space. And we knew that, in order to do anything moving forward, we had to cleanse that space. And so we had a ceremony to do that. And from that point forward, we have complete agency over that space. We reconcile with what's happened before, but we also, kind of move forward with healing and process.
Honestly, I need a bit more time. So I think I may come back to that later.
Okay. Sue, I'm going to pass it to you.
To answer the question or to move us forward? I have thoughts.
Maybe both.
Maybe both. I think that one of the things that we often see is that particular locations become loci, become contested, and carry a lot of weight. And maybe looking at what that weight is in the particulars of your community, your broader community, is part of the process of figuring out what can be addressed and what needs to be done to address space and energy. And because we're talking about particularities of community and space, I want to introduce our next activity. All of you are going to be broken up into groups, and you're going to work together. In each breakout room, you'll be assigned a scenario that may look like the community that you live in, and may not. And you may approach it from your personal, professional stance, though you shouldn't, or you may not. But you're going to be asked to solve together, to work together, to think together about a scenario for a fictional town that may look a little bit like some of what you've been dealing with. To think about the particularities of the scenario on the table. Your group is going to need to elect one member to serve as note taker and one member to serve as a summary person. Here's the rules. The most recently born member of your breakout group will be the person who presents the summary of your collective wisdom to the rest of us through your Google Slides. The most furthest away born of your group will serve as note taker, ensuring that they are hearing from mentees who are younger. You'll have a shared document to be working in, and we'll come back after about 15 minutes to walk through those together so that we can all learn from each other. Thank you, Annis. Notes are happening in the chat. There will also be a summary at the top of the slide deck and in your agenda for point of reference. You'll need to take a moment to read through the scenario on your own, select someone to read it out loud to the group, and tackle the questions one by one to come up with ideas together. I don't know who I'm handing it off to break you out into groups, but I am handing it off to them.
My name is Sasha Parodi. I'm an event planner at MAPC. I'm going to open your breakout rooms in just a minute. You will receive an invitation, but if you do not see it, you can click on the little breakout rooms button that will appear at the bottom of your toolbar. If you are unable to join your breakout rooms, please send a message in the chat and I will work with you to assign you to a breakout.
And then we'll see you back here in a few minutes. Folks, as you're coming back, you might need to, my virtual background made my limbs disappear. So you may need to stretch out, shake it out. You just got a few more minutes with us here, and hopefully for your day. So we're gonna wrap up in a moment, but I have to say, you know, like in these moments of being virtual, there are things that we miss out, like getting actually to be together and moving around the room. But watching like your collective brains in action from these Google Docs, like scrolling back and forth was amazing to see. I know that we threw you curveballs. This is tough. This is really tough work. I'm going to give just some meta feedback of things that we were seeing in real time that's really exciting and important. So one thing that may have caused you great challenge, but even just interpreting it is that like a lot of you wrote questions first. And I think just rather than saying like, aha, we know exactly what to do, none of these are easy. None of these are like the simple shoelace knot. They're all Gordian knots. They're all like knots washed up on shore that have been tossed around the sea. So just knowing that you have to figure out your questions first is really important. They will lead you in great ways. The fact that a number of you just broke out, who are the stakeholders? Who is public here, right? Rather than settling for terms, the community or the public, like even breaking down a number of groups, and here are the stakeholders we want to talk with. I think just an attention to process was fantastic to see. But also that you recognize constraints. Sometimes we get a big appetite and we're like, we want to make change, we want to push this, but recognizing there are parameters, and how does a parameter create imagination or creativity as opposed to being the thing that you're trying to hide from. Time as a resource. A lot of you are thinking about that. What do we do first? What do we do last? How do we stretch the time frame? Rather than having artificial timeframes often kind of imposed to us from elected officials or from, you know, outside of our own control. How do we figure out time? And then finally, power dynamics. Thinking about every project as having power dynamics, and even asking yourselves in this group, where do you situate? What forms of empowerment do you take on in this scenario? And also, how do you think about power as something that's shared, something that is not one-sided, but a series of relationships? So those are just some meta overview points, but just fantastic to see everyone dive in. This is hard work. Sue, I'm gonna pass it to you.
So I'm less meta, and I want to call out that I really, really loved the subversive attitudes that some groups took. In particular, I'm really proud of Group 6 for both doing audience differentiation and rejecting the premise. Like, way to pull apart the power dynamic that you were being forced into, and to extend the time frame, and to be explicit about like, this can't be a mayoral impetus. We have to change how it's working. Likewise, Group 7, thank you. Great thinking around diverting funding to arts and culture orgs and to mutual aid, and really subverting like what a crunch looks like, what a crisis looks like, to serve a much deeper purpose than the funding that had been distributed. Those are both incredibly creative. Like, if we take constraints and we are honest about constraints and we're honest about power, the opportunities to work around them become actually much greater, because we're reckoning with what's there. Groups 10 and 3, I really loved the work and the thinking around the logic of impact and the logic of differential reparation and progressive stack. Ensuring that those who are most impacted, those who often don't speak, are given precedence as impacted communities, as speakers, as contributors in public spaces and public forums. And Group 2, thank you for making that explicitly about power. To extend what Paul was talking about in terms of power and relationship, I think one of the most powerful steps that we can take is to name power as a factor in the room. To be really transparent, really surface who has power and what that implies for those who don't. And to have that be part of our everyday conversation around public space, public policy, public art, monumentality, history. that like all of those are power relationships. And when we disguise them in other ways or give them other language, we lose that. Oops. Those are my notes from the collective slideshow.
Yeah. So just to wrap up, I mean, clearly there's so much more to go. This format we experimented with for the first time with you, but just seeing this kind of rapid take, it's really inspiring. There's so much power and potential for further conversation. So, you know, I know from MAPC and the New England Foundation of the Arts that these conversations are ongoing. For us, this is a little bit of an abrupt pause or abrupt goodbye, so hopefully it's a pause. One thing I would say, just in terms of continuing conversation, some of you we've met in other spaces, and others this is the first time meeting, is to follow up with us by following us on social media or joining our mailing list, but also finding intentional ways to continue the conversations with you. This workshop is just one part of that. This is work that we always say is deeply reflective and takes a lot of time, and we do it urgently. So if there's anything that you take away from this, is that you're not doing it alone, that you have a community of folks. You may not have a single fix, but following the lead of Joel, Ariel, and so many others, that there are so many approaches that people are taking, and that listening and thinking and building out your teams and building out your toolkit is a way forward. So I know I'll say this is not a final word, but just a word of gratitude for being in it with us in this fast-paced moment. And we are really looking forward to holding space with you in one way or another as we move forward.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you, Paul, Sue, Ariel, and Joel for your presentations and for sharing your wealth of knowledge with us and for so skillfully guiding today's discussion. And big thank you to Yannick and Sasha for the tech support and helping to keep things running smoothly today. I just wanted to make a note that Emma will be sending out an email after today's event with a follow-up survey. The survey will include some questions to help us evaluate your experience in today's session, but it's also an opportunity to plug into MAPC's efforts to envision the future of Greater Boston through their regional plan update, Metro Commons. So although today's event concludes MAPC and NEFA's Public Art and Public Memory series, we hope this is just the beginning of the conversation for our region. We welcome your feedback, and we would love to know how you're carrying these learnings from this workshop into your future work. Please feel free to reach out with ideas and updates, and we look forward to staying in touch. And thanks again for joining us today, and big thank you to the team at Monument Lab.
Thank you, everybody. Peace and more soon.